Okay, so as was previously mentioned here, Serbia is going to ask for Russia's support. And as I mentioned here, Russia does have reason to want to offer that support here to Serbia. All right, so there's potential land that could be gained, and in fact, for them, this is a sort of a long-standing desire to extend their influence into the Mediterranean, something that Russia didn't have access to, and they had hoped that that would help them in this process of modernizing and industrializing, which they're quite a bit behind in terms of other European countries. So there's that that factors into their decision. Plus, there's that mutual, dislike, and I guess you could also say there's a little bit of some Slavic brotherhood here that exists. There's some cultural similarities between these two nations, Serbia and Russia. So with that endorsement, Serbia is going to reject the ultimatum. Okay, so they've got some confidence that at least they've got somebody in their corner. Now, I mean, what are the odds here that Austria-Hungary has also done something similar? Well, they're pretty good, right? They're going to make sure that Germany, if things go south, that Germany is going to definitely have their back, right? Because they've got this alliance agreement. Okay, so that's where we go from there, right? So next question is, so then what happens? And I think the next domino here is going to be obvious, right? Austria-Hungary is going to invade Serbia. Okay, so that's pretty predictable, and that is in fact what happens. So now, I mean, at this point here, we've got Russia's asked for support, Serbia's asked for support. Russia's guaranteed it. So what should happen following this? Well, Russia is going to react, and they are going to mobilize to threaten Austria-Hungary. Now, that word mobilize, what does that mean? Well, that we're talking about here moving your military into position here. So it's not a declaration of war, but it's very much a warlike gesture, right? Like, imagine if you were at war with your neighbor or if you didn't like your neighbor and they all of a sudden, had a bazooka pointed at your house, you'd probably feel a little unnerved. So that's kind of what's going to happen in this case, all right? And now this in itself, so this is a threatening action by Russia. And in Russia's case, this brings about another point, all right? In this process of mobilizing, moving troops into place, is this going to be something that is going to happen quickly for Russia? Russia, one of their great strengths is that they've got all this land, right? And huge population, lots of people. But there are problems that exist in Russia in 1914. And one of them is, as I mentioned in the previous video, that they're not overly developed industrially. So that means that in terms of infrastructure, things like railway lines, roads, I mean, cars and mechanized or motorized vehicles are even in their infancy at this time. So having ways to move men into place where they're needed is going to be a real challenge for Russia. So this threatening action is not as immediate a threat as it might be if it was other countries. You can also see here, in this photograph that, the Russian process of mobilization, they were not overly discriminating in who would join the military in this case. And, the other thing that's worth mentioning is that, the problems that exist in Russia, and we'll come back to this later on, are significant. The Russian leader, this guy's name was Tsar Nicholas II. He is a bit of a disaster, quite honestly. And Tsar Nicholas II, there's crushing poverty. So, there's real issues with starvation, unemployment, very little access to, any sort of service here. And the leader is enormously wealthy, and he's ruling in a way where he doesn't seem to acknowledge any of that, the suffering of his own people. So when you ask your people to go to war, and you don't even ask in this case, you demand, because you're the czar, the response might not be what you'd hoped. And providing weapons and all those things to inspire confidence might also be an issue for Russia. Okay, so that's where we're going to stop here.